Just before we start, this podcast is an open forum for conversation. It is not and is not intended to constitute legal advice. If you are in need of legal advice, please reach out. We're always happy to support your business whenever and however we can. Hello and welcome to Bird & Bird's Competitive Edge, the podcast series where we dissect competition issues to help you understand how they might affect your business. My name is Louis Breen and I'm a paralegal in the competition team here in London. I'm delighted to be joined today by two of our most eminent energy law experts, Tialda Beetstra, Senior Associate in our Amsterdam office, and Clara Desprez, Associate in our London office. For today's episode, we are looking into REMIT. We'll be discussing what it is, how it intersects with competition law, recent enforcement trends, and also looking ahead to the end of 2025 and start of 2026. Clara, let's start with the basics. What does REMIT stand for, and what exactly does it do?
Yes, of course, and thanks for having us. REMIT stands for the Regulation on Wholesale Energy Market Integrity and Transparency, and it applies to trading of wholesale energy products. It is an EU regulation that came into force in 2011. It has also equivalents in other jurisdictions. In simple terms, the regulation has two main pillars. The first one is that it prohibits insider trading and market manipulation. And the second one is that it requires market participants, so traders, generators, and large consumers, to publicly disclose inside information and to report transaction data. You can think of it as the energy sector's equivalent to financial market rules. It aims to ensure that wholesale energy markets operate fairly and transparently.
And Tialda, who's watching to make sure companies comply?
REMIT actually has a two-tier enforcement system. So at the European level, ACER, the Agency for Cooperation of Energy Regulators, coordinates oversight and has been given increasing powers over the years, something we'll discuss a little bit later on. But the day-to-day enforcement happens at national level through national regulatory authorities. We will refer to these as NRAs or national regulators. So you have regulators like the ACM in the Netherlands and the CRE in France. They are all conducting investigations and imposing sanctions where required.
Now, given this is a Competitive Edge podcast, I'm curious about how REMIT intersects with competition law. Do these rules overlap? If yes, how so?
Well, it's actually quite complementary. REMIT focuses specifically on market manipulation and insider trading. So it's about ensuring that market participants act fairly on the wholesale energy markets, regardless of their importance or competitive position in the relevant market. In some respects, REMIT could also be associated with white-collar crime law. It is actually the case that it's in some jurisdictions where REMIT infringement can be subject to criminal penalties. Competition law, on the other hand, tackles issues that suggest a harm to competition, like collusion between companies and abuse of dominant market positions. There can be a certain degree of confusion between these two legal fields because a REMIT infringement can also result in a harm to competition, but those remain two separate infringements under two separate legal regimes.
That's completely right, Clara. Actually, before REMIT came into force, regulators sometimes struggled to address certain behaviors that looked like market manipulation. There's a famous case involving E.ON and suspected capacity hoarding. Competition authorities found it difficult to prove abuse of dominance under traditional competition law rules, which was one of the driving forces behind introducing REMIT. It gave regulators a more targeted tool for addressing market manipulation issues without the need to prove dominant position or collusion.
So REMIT filled a regulatory gap that competition law couldn't quite address?
Precisely. While competition law ensures that competition in wholesale energy markets isn't distorted by anti-competitive agreements or abusive behavior, REMIT actually ensures that wholesale energy market signals and prices generally reflect supply and demand fundamentals and are not distorted by market manipulation or insider trading. In that sense, it actually also reflects financial market regulation and its concepts within the specifics of the energy market.
Let's talk about recent developments. REMIT II, or the revised REMIT, came into effect in the second half of 2024. What changes did it introduce?
Well, REMIT II brought some really significant changes, but I think we can highlight a few that we consider most relevant. For example, there are new obligations for persons professionally executing transactions in wholesale energy markets, such as trading companies. Those entities are now required to alert ACER and the relevant national authorities if they reasonably suspect that certain orders or transactions infringe REMIT provisions. Before REMIT II, this obligation existed, but it only applied to persons professionally arranging transactions, so for example, power exchanges, but this excluded simple trading companies. In addition, REMIT II imposes stricter obligations to both persons professionally arranging and executing transactions.
In what way are these obligations stricter?
Well, based on REMIT II, those two categories of entities need to carefully consider implementing arrangements, systems, and procedures to, first of all, identify potential breaches, second, to guarantee that employees act independently and are preserved by conflicts of interest, and thirdly, to detect and report suspicious orders and transactions.
Thank you. What aspect of REMIT 2 do you find most interesting, Tialda?
Well, that's a difficult choice, but REMIT 2 also introduces a definition of algorithmic trading, together with obligations related to such form of trading in the wholesale energy products. This clearly reflects how the energy trading landscape has evolved since the original regulation, as algorithmic trading is increasingly prevalent and definitely here to stay. In short, algorithmic trading relates to trading where a computer algorithm automatically determines individual parameters of orders to trade, with limited or no human intervention. Companies using algorithmic trading systems now have enhanced record-keeping obligations and need to have in place effective systems and risk controls to ensure that the algorithms are subject to appropriate trading thresholds and limits. The purpose of this is to prevent the sending of erroneous orders to trade and that the algorithm functions in a way that disrupts the market.
And this might be a simple question, but why is this important?
This is particularly important because algorithmic trading can execute thousands of transactions in seconds, potentially amplifying any manipulative strategies. The new rules require companies to have robust risk management systems in place. Also, algorithmic traders must notify their engagement in algorithmic trading to the relevant authorities using the centralized European register, and we know that some NRAs are enforcing and monitoring algorithmic trading and are checking compliance with REMIT by companies who are active in algorithmic trading. So, for example, through requests of information where the market participant must provide a description of its algorithmic trading strategies, details of trading parameters and limits, key compliance and risk controls, and evidence of system testing. And this can be quite a lot for market participants.
Okay, and what changed from an enforcement perspective?
Well, one of the key points of this reform is that ACER has been given a set of investigative powers for cases which concern at least two member states, which echo the powers given to the EU Commission in competition matters. This was justified by the rise of cases having a cross-border impact. ACER can now issue RFIs, conduct on-site inspections, and enter business premises as well as private premises subject to conditions. However, those new investigative powers must still be carried out in the active collaboration with the relevant NIAs. So on this, ACER has stated that it is building up its capabilities in this area, so we can expect to see some ACER investigations from the second half of next year.
Speaking of enforcement, what trends are you seeing and how REMIT is being applied in practice?
Well, the numbers are quite striking actually. 2024 alone accounted for roughly 50% of all REMIT fines issued to date. We've seen some particularly large penalties from the Romanian regulator, which has been very active in this space. Most infringement decisions relate to the prohibition of market manipulation, and this is likely the reason for the high number of fines. Linking back to the points on algorithmic trading, the Spanish regulator fined a market participant €1 million for market manipulation. It used high-frequency algorithms to place a large volume of orders to block other market participants. On the other hand, the Dutch ACM mainly seems to enforce REMIT through soft enforcement measures, like firm conversations with market participants, warnings, and/or commitments. In all these years, the ACM has only imposed one administrative fine and otherwise accepted commitments. Not to say that the ACM should now start imposing fine after fine, but it is definitely remarkable.
Remarkable indeed, but the ACM wouldn't be the only NRA who has chosen not to enforce REMIT through financial penalties. So, you said the majority of breaches were for market manipulation. Clara, are we also seeing penalties for smaller, more inadvertent breaches?
Yes, It is a mix. Some cases involve market manipulation or insider trading, but many are procedural failures. So companies not publishing information quickly enough or not recognizing that certain information should be publicly disclosed at all. We are therefore seeing a fair number of penalties for breaches of Article 4, which requires the timely publication of inside information, and for Article 8, which requires the provision of transaction data to ACER. This suggests companies are still getting to grips with exactly what needs to be publicly disclosed or provided and when.
And now, as we look ahead to the end of 2025 and beyond, what should businesses be watching out for?
Well, 2025 has started relatively quiet after the publication of the updated version of the ACER REMIT guidance at the end of last year. Then in May this year, 2 centralized REMIT platforms went live. The first one being the REMIT Data Reference Center, which provides public access to anonymized trading data. And the second one being the Single Inside Information Access Point, which centralizes information from several approved inside information platforms. Those platforms should facilitate the access to historic data, but should not be used as tools for real-time monitoring of the market. Indeed, for example, the Inside Information Access Point does not include information collected within the last 2 days. And actually, because of this, we observed that some market participants have reservations about the usefulness of those platforms.
Are there also the implementing regulations?
Yes, so as we speak, the implementing regulations on REMIT II, on the details for data reporting, and on introducing new rules for inside information platforms and registered reporting mechanisms are being finalized and will provide more clarity on practical compliance requirements. Regarding the one on data reporting, the most relevant change is probably the inclusion of the obligation to report exposure and balancing transactions data. And then those 2 regulations are expected to be adopted at the beginning of next year. Maybe, Tialda, you have something to add on this topic. What do you expect for 2026?
I expect, looking forward, that we will definitely see continued focus on algorithmic trading compliance and cross-border coordination by ACER. ACER is really building its capabilities, so definitely expect more sophisticated investigations. Because of the increased obligations on market participants and enhanced investigative powers for ACER introduced by REMIT II, I would expect that we will see an increase in enforcement under REMIT II heading into 2026 and beyond.
Clara, any other developments on the horizon?
Yes, so one interesting development to watch is the Swiss REMIT. Switzerland has adopted its own version of these rules, which will create additional compliance considerations for companies trading across Swiss borders. Those rules should come into force by the end of next year. And this is another example of how market integrity regulation is spreading beyond the EU.
That is really interesting. We are actually also closely monitoring the developments in terms of hydrogen-related contracts and storage contracts, which are now considered wholesale energy products in scope of REMIT. However, reporting details are still being developed.
And so before we wrap up, what's your key advice for businesses operating in these markets?
Well, first, I would say make sure you have robust procedures for preventing market manipulation and identifying and disclosing inside information. Indeed, the penalties for getting this wrong are significant, and as we have discussed, the amounts are growing.
For sure, and don't underestimate the importance of training. Many breaches happen because the business doesn't recognize when they're handling price-sensitive information. Regular training and clear internal procedures are essential, especially for relatively new market participants in wholesale energy markets that we are seeing emerging now. So we need to see how this works out in practice.
That's excellent advice. Tialda and Clara, thank you so much for joining us on Competitive Edge. For more insights on competition and regulatory issues affecting your business, subscribe to our podcast series and also visit our website at twobirds.com. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll see you next time.